If you've just joined us, welcome to Should Your Practice Offer Payroll Services webinar. I'm going to go ahead and welcome today's moderator into the conversation, Kristen Beadle. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Linda. And welcome everyone to today's sponsored webinar, Should Your Practice Offer Payroll Services, sponsored by KeyPay and hosted by CPA Australia. My name is Kristen Beadle and I am the Manager of Public Practice and SME Professional Standards and Business Support at CPA Australia. We have people joining us from all over Australia today for the webinar. So before we begin, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. It is now my pleasure to invite Leanne Robertson, from KeyPay to start today's webinar. So I'll hand that over to you now, Leanne, and I will go off screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that welcome, and it's lovely to be here today. So thank you for the opportunity to present today. So today we're going to be talking about should your practice offer payroll services? A little bit about me. So I'm an implementation and compliance specialist at KeyPay. I train and implement new clients onto KeyPay and also build a modern award and enterprise agreement automation within the platform. So I am a CPA turned payroll specialist. I was previously a finance manager for a hotel chain for many years, where I actually implemented KeyPay as a product, fell in love with the program and actually grew my passion for payroll. So over the years, it's led me to study further into payroll legislation and also HR in order to cover the full aspects of employment relations and payroll. So a little bit about KeyPay. So KeyPay is a cloud-based payroll and workforce management platform. We service over 200,000 businesses and we work with 750 partners globally. We currently support businesses across Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Singapore and Malaysia. At its core, KeyPay simplifies the payroll process to save time and relieve payroll professionals from the stresses of payroll. We are focused on compliance, automation and the efficiency to reduce repetitive payroll tasks and errors. Also in 2021, KeyPay was acquired by leading HR provider Employment Hero. So we're now part of a greater ecosystem that streamlines workflows and improves the employment experience for business owners, advisors and employees. So that's a bit about me and where I'm from. So let's get started with the presentation for today. So bit of background on why we chose this topic. Australian payroll legislation is incredibly complex and supporting clients through unique payroll scenarios can be very daunting. We conducted a survey of public accountants, so their common hesitation to offering payroll service are a lack of expertise internally and also the complexity of the legislation. So today our aim is to address the key challenges of payroll for accountants and to offer an understanding of the opportunities available in offering payroll services. So hopefully by the end of this session you'll take away an understanding of the opportunities for payroll services within accounting practices, the potential risk areas in Australian payroll, including modern awards, and the elements of a payroll toolkit that you could use to grow your payroll services, so technology, associations and training. So this is a bit of the detailed agenda for today. So divided into 3 areas: payroll services, looking at what actually are payroll services, what are clients looking for, why do some accounting firms avoid offering payroll services, and what are the benefits to offering it. Then we'll move on to the risks with offering payroll services. So what can go wrong? What are the key risks with Australian payroll itself? And then finally, should you wish to offer payroll services, we're going to talk about a bit of a toolkit. So looking at people, resources and technology. So what are payroll services? So payroll services can include outsourced payroll. So that service would be calculating and processing payroll, including gross wage, PAYG, superannuation calculations. Also involve the actual processing of the superannuation payment via a clearinghouse to super funds. It could also include as implementing new systems as part of onboarding a new client that facilitate rostering, timesheet entry, leave request entry and approval, expense claim request and approval. As part of the ongoing service, you may be onboarding new employees, so obtaining their tax file declaration information, their super fund, or their basic details. Also, part of the service is ensuring compliance with superannuation and single touch payroll requirements. And it could also include the preparation of returns such as the payroll tax returns and annual work cover returns. Another service that can be included in payroll services are payroll audits. So that's where you would review items such as a client's compliance to payroll legislation, taking a look at their processes to see that they're efficient, and also identifying risks in the business such as underpayments and non-compliance. In performing a payroll office audit, you should include a number of different skill sets. So you want to engage a payroll specialist, a human resource specialist, and an industrial relations specialist or lawyer. But a big asterisk on this one, there is a very high level of risk in offering a payroll audit service as an accountant. So I would not recommend engaging in a payroll audit unless you have assistance from a HR, IR, and payroll professional as well. Finally, another service to offer as part of the payroll services offering are payroll reconciliations. So that's where we're offering services such as recalculating employees' pays under different conditions. So this may be, for example, where an employee is being paid an annualised wage. That's where an employee is paid a salary that should cover them had they been paid hourly on the award. So that salary should cover all the overtime and penalties and allowances they would have received had they been engaged just purely under the award. Another example would be recalculating someone's pay under a correct classification. So perhaps an employee was paid at level 2, found that they should be actually level 3. So that's recalculating the correct pay or the back pay owing. They can be large-scale projects as well. For example, I conducted one for 500 employees. That was over a 5-year period, so it can be quite time-consuming and a lot of detail on that work. So why a client may request this work to be done is actually recently a lot of modern awards have put a requirement in to perform annual reconciliations. Prior to that requirement being brought in, it was merely just noted that an employee should be better off, but now there's actual clear wording to say that this annual reconciliation must be performed. Another reason why a client may request this is they are concerned that they may have underpaid employees, so they just want to make sure they've checked all the boxes and paying their employees correctly. And finally, another reason is Fair Work may have identified some issues with compliance and they may have commenced proceedings against the client. So that's payroll reconciliations. So what are clients looking for in a payroll solution? So in order to describe what they're looking for, let's look at their pain points in relation to payroll. So again, Australian payroll legislation, very complex and overwhelming. A lot of small businesses can't afford to have a dedicated HR and payroll specialist on the payroll, assisting them day to day. We find that a lot of companies just naturally, when they introduce the payroll service into their own company, they come up with poor processes that are time consuming, involve a lot of manual data entry, say with paper timesheets, and they have a high number of payroll errors. And as well, a lot of people are stuck on an old payroll software system that's not really suiting their needs anymore. It can be hard to use. It's not giving them the required report information as well and doesn't support a paperless solution. So that's the pain points that Australian businesses are facing with payroll. So what solution can you as an accountant offer in order to ease those pain points? You can offer a more efficient payroll process. So in providing an outsourced payroll service, you could implement the client onto your software solution that you've chosen in your business. It could be leading to elimination of the manual data entry, the paper timesheets. It also reduces their internal workload, so they're not having to have someone on staff processing the payroll and chasing up things for payroll. And in weighing up the cost of having in-house programs and staff and advice on hand, there could be a cost efficiency with the outsourcing model versus the in-house model. The other solution accountants can offer is the correct payroll legislation interpretation and application. So in conjunction with skilled payroll, HR and IR specialists, part of your service could be offering that correct interpretation. And in addition to the specialist, having a payroll solution that a software solution that automatically interprets modern awards and up to date with legislation is something that can ease those pain points as well. So in talking about those issues, why do some accountants avoid offering payroll services to their clients? So there's similar pain points for accountants that we saw with the small businesses and just businesses in general. Obviously, the legislation is always changing, can be difficult to keep up. If you don't have an efficient process and software on hand, it can be a time-consuming and unprofitable service. So if you don't get it right, it can be something that detracts from your business. Just with processing payroll itself, it can be quite easy to make errors and then actually quite expensive to correct. And just offering payroll in general can add that additional risk to an accounting firm. So what can you do to, I guess, ease those pain points in offering payroll services? We'll talk a lot more about this later in the presentation, but basically it's to engage the right people, the payroll, HR and IR professionals, connecting with associations and connecting with those resources that can assist with compliance, and also finding the right technology solutions. So payroll software and time and attendance software has come a long way in the last 5 to 10 years. There's also a lot of online lodgements that the government has introduced. So the big one being single touch payroll, that reduces a lot of the administrative burden for those processing payroll. There's also a lot of automation now, so the calculation of entitlements and also award conditions. And if you choose the right solution, they're always up to date with the changes with legislation. And a lot of them are focused on paperless services, so cloud-based timesheets, cloud-based tax file decks, and super forms as well. So just eliminating that paper burden that used to be the way with payroll. So should you choose to offer payroll services in your firm, what are the benefits to you? So obviously it's an additional service to offer existing clients. So maybe in your firm you already have a number of clients where you're doing the bookkeeping, BAS services, whatever it may be. It can be just a simple upsell to just add on payroll services to those clients. When you do it right with the right people and the right technology and resources, it can be quite a profitable product. Also, once you've onboarded a new client and you've really got to know their business and set them up for success, it can be quite a routine and repeatable task for your business to process. So every pay run can be quite similar, so you can get into that routine. And finally, just having that extra service offering to your clients can just create a richer client engagement and increase the value in the relationship. So you're getting a wider picture of their business scenario once you include the big cost, which is one of the biggest costs in the business, which is usually wages. So that's all the good parts, but what can go wrong with offering payroll services? So offering payroll services, that outsourcing payroll audits and payroll reconciliation, they do come with a large amount of risk, obviously. Providing a client with incorrect advice or taking part of processing incorrect wages can lead to being held accessorily liable under the Fair Work Act for underpayment of wages. Additionally, CPA members who undertake audit engagements without the necessary experience and/or professional support can lead to breaches and professional indemnity claims as well. So there is a bit of a risk there. To use a real-world example, in 2017, the Fair Work Commission actually made its first charge under the accessorily liable scheme to an actual accounting firm. So Easy Accounting 123 provided payroll services for a fast food operator, Law Impression. The employees were paid flat rates that were below the minimum set in the fast food award, so they were getting the same rate during the week as they would on a weekend or public holiday, which is obviously not compliant, as awards usually dictate different rates on the weekend and public holidays. They also weren't being paid certain penalties and allowance per the award. So the Fair Work Commission found that Easy Accounting's director did know that the payments were not sufficient to cover minimum award entitlements, and there was evidence of that as they took part in the calculation of the underpayment amounts to the employees. So obviously if they have the skill to work out what was underpaid, they knew what should have been paid. So in the end, Easy Accounting were penalised $53,000. The company itself was penalised $115,000, and this was due to the underpayment of just 2 workers of working holiday visas, and those underpayments totaled $9,500. It's interesting to note, though, that Easy Accounting was only involved in the underpayment of one of those employees, of which was $750 for underpayment. So, relatively small part of the underpayment, but they were held up to quite a higher penalty for their role in that. So, something to keep in mind there, that even though you're not the actual company, you can be involved in being held liable as well. So just with Australian payroll itself, what are the key risks? So even up to Australian businesses, not just in the outsourcing world, there are just general risks with payroll. So the big one is probably not keeping up with changes in payroll-related legislation. So there's a lot of pieces of legislation that cover payroll. So there's the modern award system. There's 122 modern awards that cover a number of different industries and occupations. There's also the Fair Work Act, there's superannuation legislation, and there's a number of legislation that governs leave as well. So, for example, long service leave is different per state, and that's certainly not a full list of the legislation that applies. So it's quite a complex legal environment to get this right. Just to highlight a bit of the volume of changes recently, I've just did a quick search to what sort of things have changed since July, and this is certainly not a full list of what's changed, but just in the awards sector alone, large-scale changes were made to the Social Community Home Care Disability Services Industry Award on 1st of July. So they brought in new allowances, they made new minimum engagements for certain shifts. So in order for companies to be compliant with that, some of them had to actually change a lot of internal processes and rostering as well. So that was quite a big change. Also, you'll hear me mention annualised wages a lot in this presentation, but it's a big part of what's been talked about in the payroll community, just with underpayments, such as we've seen with supermarkets and restaurants. So having people on these salaries is quite risky. So to tackle that, there were changes made in the Restaurant and Hospitality Award that included stricter requirements where even though these employees may be on a salary, should they work a certain number of hours, they termed outer limits, they're to be paid extra wages. So that was quite a different process change as well for businesses to get used to. There's also the next point, the standard annual wage increases, but over the last 2 or 3 years, they've happened in stages. So this year they increased all but 10 awards in July, and then in October they increased the remaining 10 awards. So quite a bit to tackle there. And just the last point, in the Children's Services Award, they included a new allowance. So that's just a snapshot of some of the changes that happened since July in the awards. In terms of other legislative changes, you may be aware that prior to July, an employee had to earn $450 in the calendar month before they were to be paid the super guarantee, but that was removed in July of 2022. So increasing the wage costs for businesses and also adding that extra requirement there. So a lot of changes to keep up with. Another big risk is just the lack of understanding of modern awards. So there are a lot of the awards, and within each award there's a lot of clauses, and surely I don't think anyone's really purely an expert on all of them, so there's quite a lot there. But the issue with that I see implementing a lot of clients and having a look at their payroll, I see 4 main areas that people can get into trouble with the modern award. So for example, the employee's classification. So businesses may incorrectly classify someone under the award. So say in a restaurant, someone is hired as a wait staff, a food and beverage attendant. When you actually may look at what duties the employee is actually performing, you might find that they're acting in more of a team leader or supervisory capacity. They may be directing the shift, they may be rostering staff, and that sort of thing. So that would be an area that, even though they've been hired as, say, at the attendant level, they are owed the team leader or supervisor level just due to what they're performing. Also, there are, just to keep using the restaurant as an example, once you get to a certain level, people aren't covered by the award anymore. They're too high a classification. They become non-award, but often businesses get that wrong where that threshold is. So you may think someone's not award, but actually they are under the award and they're owed all the penalties and allowances that come with being under that award. Again, annualised wages. So this is actually where you're paying the salary that is designed to cover all those entitlements, the first aid allowance, the overtime, that sort of thing. So what you actually may find is when you analyse those timesheets, had they been paid under the award, they would have got more under that scenario versus the salary. So that's where a big issue lies just with modern awards today. The third point, there can just be a lack of understanding of award provisions. So quite a number of clauses in these awards, and I've found just through implementations that employees aren't aware of certain clauses. The most common ones I see that people aren't aware of are things such as a certain break between shifts. So a lot of awards state that you must have 10 hours break between shifts, and if you don't, you're liable. You're supposed to be getting double pay or overtime. So I find a lot of clients don't realise that, or they've come from a system that doesn't easily identify when that break hasn't been achieved. There's also times when penalties may be applied, such as say you started work before 6 a.m. and that may call for an early work penalty. And there's also things such as minimum daily engagement. So for example, an award may say that a casual employee must be engaged for a minimum of 3 hours per shift. So that may not have, the employer may not be aware, or they may not have had a good process to pick up when those daily engagements were met. And finally, the one I see too often is the comment, the award doesn't apply to us. So for example, I work with some employees that they know, say the base rate and the award is $25, but they've given a rate such as $40, and they believe that that waives their rights to certain obligations under the award, such as paying overtime if you exceed 38 hours a week, or paying allowances. So there are circumstances where that can be a legitimate arrangement. If you've engaged a HR/IR professional and they've written a contract that actually allows that, and say there's something in the award that permits those sort of arrangements, it can be a legitimate thing. But on the most part, the majority of cases I've seen is sometimes they don't even have a contract, or it's just the way we've been operating for many years. So yeah, that's probably the most alarming one. So once these people get, say, reported to Fair Work and they actually calculate what would have been owed to the employee, there would be an underpayment as well. So a lot of risk with bond awards. There's also risks in relation to administrative requirements. So Fair Work dictates a lot of requirements that a business must perform in regards to admin. So for example, a payslip must be issued within 1 working day of paying employees, and there's a full list of what it must include. So for example, the ordinary hourly rate, and if that rate includes any loadings, and splitting out items such as allowances and penalties as well. It should also clearly show any deductions or superannuation contributions as well. So that's one that Fair Work are actually finding a bit of people, a bit of businesses when they actually audit those businesses. A lot of people aren't following that one. Just in general, time and wages records must be kept for 7 years. And finally, there are a lot of strict rules around deductions from an employee's pay. So say you made a payroll error, an employee gets an extra $100, and you identify that. It's not as simple as just minusing off $100 in the next pay. You actually have to go through a lot of requirements to actually get permission from that employee and perhaps offer a repayment plan. So often businesses aren't aware of that. And the risk that keeps popping up is just the underpayments and overpayments. And why would they occur? Obviously, the annualised wage, failure to adhere to the legislation changes. Businesses may miss that increase in minimum wages, or the change in modern awards that may give rise to higher conditions for the employee or new allowances. In general, with the processing of payroll, there can be a miscommunication between the client and the accounting firm. So perhaps you weren't made aware that employee has departed the business and they have been paid their automatic salary for weeks without being told that they're not actually supposed to receive that. It may also just be other things such as you're not told that an employee's bank account has changed. So that can be an issue that results in errors. You might also find that the client themselves has poor internal processes. They aren't correctly recording time worked via timesheets and that sort of thing. So that can result in incorrect payments to employees. And the risk that's always there with payroll can be fraud. So perhaps the person on the client's end is providing you fraudulent information, or can even be a risk, unfortunately, that someone within your own firm is taking part in some fraud. So that's the risk, another risk in payroll. So the other risk as well is fines, infringement notices and penalties. So I've collated a little bit of a list here. It's not an exhaustive list, but yeah, so it's just a few that I've pointed out. So for example, super, as you probably know, is due to be paid quarterly for a lot of employers. So there can be penalties and interest charges for not paying those on time. And I've actually seen that happen in businesses. So it's not something that is just written but not obeyed. That actually does happen. And you can get fined for failing to keep adequate records in relation to super payments. With single touch payroll, which is the transfer of information of each pay run to the ATO, that's due on the day of the pay run, and should employees or outsource providers continue to lodge that late, there can be a penalty associated with that. With those record keeping requirements I mentioned with pay slips and just keeping the records on the books for 7 years, Fair Work can hand out infringement notices for failing to adhere to those, maximum of $1,300 per individual and $6,000 per body corporate. And as we saw in that example, you may be issued a fine if you're found accessorily liable by taking part in contravention of a workplace law. So after considering all the benefits and risks, perhaps you still want to proceed with offering payroll services within your business. So in order to best protect yourself against that risk and to offer a great solution that addresses the pain points for your clients, I believe it's the best, strategy to go about it is incorporating the 3 pillars of people, resources, and technology. So starting with people, how do you recruit, retain, or train for payroll? So just starting on the left, who's in your team as a payroll outsourcing or payroll services organisation. So you want to start with the people that are actually going to process payroll, your payroll officers, and it's good to look for someone who's got experience in processing outsourced payroll as opposed to someone who's just processed payroll for one company. So there is a slightly different skill set in juggling the deadlines of, say, processing, say, 20 to 30 payrolls, which is, I worked in outsourcing myself, and that's about the amount of clients you can take on as one particular payroll officer. So there's a certain skill there. In addition to a payroll officer, you want to at least have one compliance specialist on hand, given depending on the size of your organisation. So that would be someone with experience in processing payroll, as well as they have a background in interpreting legislation, enterprise agreements, awards. And also it's great if they have knowledge in system implementations. That way, when you're bringing on new clients, this compliance specialist can actually onboard those clients onto the software that you're using. So just a little point on that, I would recommend that you bring your clients onto the payroll software that that you've chosen, rather than keeping your clients on their existing payroll software, because it can be quite hard to hire for a payroll officer that knows how to use MyHub and KeyPay and Xero. It can be quite difficult, so it's great if you've got them all on the same software system. In addition to that, you can also, many programs offer a dashboard view where you can monitor upcoming pay runs and that sort of thing. So just a little note on that. So the third, I guess, type of professional you should engage when setting up the people for your firm, HR and or IR specialists. So that can be that you actually hire someone in-house to assist with advising on the compliance of your clients, or you could actually partner with an employment law advisory firm. So someone such as Employment Innovations Legal or EmploySure. So having that the person in the team or either in partnership is a great way to assist with that compliance. So once we've got those people on hand, how do we ensure they've got the right knowledge by training? So unfortunately, it's not currently the norm to need a certain qualification to perform payroll. When hiring for a payroll officer, there isn't a particular qualification that businesses are looking for. It's not really standard in Australia, which is unfortunate given the high risk of underpayments and the complexity of legislation. So should you choose to offer payroll services, I would recommend implementing a training program to tackle that, to ensure that every person you have who's taking part in processing payroll has the necessary knowledge and skill set to perform payroll services. So you could have new staff complete an initial course to commence work, and then create an ongoing training plan with at certain intervals where they're sharpening their skills along the way. So where do you look for training courses? There's a lot of different areas, but I find these three are quite good. So the Australian Payroll Association offers a cert in payroll admin, or even a diploma as well. So you may want to get your new staff working on that in the background, or you may choose to have them attend a shorter course such as Payroll Essentials, which would just describe all the basics to payroll, and that's a one-day course. And there's also TAPS as well, which is another payroll association. So they offer a payroll management certificate. And again, they offer shorter courses as well, such as Foundations of Payroll, which is a 3-day course. Applied Education offers a Diploma of Payroll Services as well, and shorter courses such as Payroll Administration in Australia, which is a self-paced online learning course. So I've actually completed that one myself. It was up-to-date legislation, and you could access the information for, I believe it was up to a year, and it came with a great booklet that pretty much described every bit of legislation that you needed to cover in order to process payroll. Didn't include modern awards, obviously, because that would be quite a large course, but gave a great overview. So that's our first pillar of people, so ensuring you have the right team and you've got a plan for training. Next pillar is our resources. So what other areas can you engage to ensure compliance? So the Fair Work Ombudsman, it's always great to go straight to the legislative, the person who's actually providing this in practice. So you can create a free account with them. So you can do a number of things in that account. You can actually get advice on a particular workplace issue. So you've got access to logic query, and it usually works on a very detailed example. So you may say, my client's employing a nurse, they're working from this time to this time. What exactly would be the pay in this scenario? And Fair Work actually gives you verbal and written advice on how that person should be paid, so you can be sure that you're paying someone compliantly. Also, with that account, you get access to pay and conditions tools, and also a newsletter that alerts to any industry and award changes that affect payroll. There's also the Fair Work Commission, which is the body that actually facilitates the legislative changes to modern awards, and they actually do all the unfair dismissal claims and things like that. So you can actually create an account with them as well and subscribe to receive updates about changes to awards. So you can select just the awards that you're interested in or your clients are using, or you can subscribe to all of them. So you'll be able to see when a potential change is put forward for consideration, and you can see when they actually come into in place in the actual awards. So there's also the opportunity to become part of a workplace relations service provider, so becoming a member of one of those. So that's a company such as EmployeeSure. You become a member, you get access to phone support for particular issues, and yep, they offer advice as well. So they also provide a lot of HR advice as well as just interpretation of certain scenarios. So that's quite good to become a member of that. Talking about those payroll associations again, Australian Payroll Association and TAPS. So becoming a member of one of those associations also allows you to be able to call them with certain scenarios, get advice on maybe how the changes in legislation should be applied in your business, and they have a number of online resources, so they've got templates and just general guides on how to do certain things. They offer a newsletter as well, and yeah, they obviously offer those courses. So it's a good idea to consider becoming a member of one of those. Australian Payroll Association as well actually has an annual conference as well. So I actually went along to that, which was quite good. They gave an update of all the recent legislation changes and had people speaking from Fair Work and other and ATO as well. So that was quite good. Finally, if you are finding that you're specialising in one particular industry, or a lot of your clients are, say in the hotel area or they're retailers, it can be good to partner with an industry association. So when I was the finance manager of the hotel chain, we were actually a member of the Queensland Hotel Association. They gave in-person courses on how to interpret the Hospitality Award. They also gave over-the-phone advice on particular things such as what should this particular employee be classified as, how should we handle a termination. So it's often good to look to see if there's a particular industry body that you can become a member of where they can offer certain advice. So that's a lot of resources to consider in putting in your toolkit to offer payroll services. Finally, the third pillar, technology. So payroll technology is always advancing and can provide efficiencies not possible before. Just for example, when I was looking for a payroll solution in 2017, I believe KeyPay was the only software that I saw that offered all-in-one automation and time and attendance. But certainly if I were to look now, there's a lot more people are doing that. It's become quite the norm to offer a lot of different services and automation throughout the technology. So if you haven't looked in a while, it may be worth looking again to see what's out there. So a lot of what these systems can do are things such as automatically applying increases, such as changes to the superannuation guarantee. It's been going up by 0.5% in recent times. It also automatically adjusts the annual tax table, so there's no import needed, it just happens automatically. And a number of systems also offer that annual minimum wage increase, so that's automated, so you're not manually changing, say, hundreds of employees' pay rates. There's also automation of paying of superannuation. Before, that was in a business I used to work in, it was a number of different checks to different super funds, but now that all happens with one click of a button, or even just without the click of a button. I've seen some programs do that. It just pays super automatically when it's on the interval that you require. They obviously automatically calculate PAYG deductions, but they also do that little bit extra and help you calculate difficult termination calculations, such as the different components of a redundancy calculation, looking into what caps or what percentages apply and the age of the employee, whether the pension age comes into it. So systems now can incorporate all of that and assist with that calculation. Also, if you're working with a client with salary packaging, it can automatically process that payment to the third party rather than that having to be a manual payment. And as I mentioned, a lot of payroll systems or time and attendance software programs, they automatically interpret the awards. So you're not having to manually go through each timesheet and say, look at the break between this shift and the next shift, or determining whether they've fallen into overtime for a particular shift. That can happen automatically now. So that's good with technology. So a final point in considering offering payroll services, a good way to, I guess, reduce your risk and just get a good strategy going for what services you're going to offer. You may want to choose to specialize in one industry. So, for example, you may want to just outsource to hospitality industries or hospitality businesses. So in doing that, you'd only need to understand up to 3 awards. There's Hospitality Award, Restaurant Award, and the Registered Clubs Award. So that would just limit the amount of legislation you have to keep up with. And also when you're choosing your software to offer to these clients, you may find that the software you select suits those needs of that business. Like, for example, I find that the needs of, say, a restaurant in terms of rostering and timesheets is vastly different to, say, a health services organisation where they're needing to keep track of multiple clients per day, and often they need to analyse those costs in the profit and loss report under those different clients. So that's a good place to start, is just picking that industry, picking the software that suits that industry, and going from there. So to wrap up, should your practice offer payroll services? So if you choose to go forward, you need to analyse the risk and understand the risk, but there's also the benefits, so that additional revenue stream, boosting your business, and also improving client relationships by offering that additional service. And yes, so we've also talked about how best to offer that payroll service, combining those 3 pillars of people, resources, and technology. So that was everything we wanted to discuss for that. So I think now we'll move to any questions.
Thank you. Well done, Leanne. So we have had a couple of questions that has popped through. And one of them is, does the award system apply to what they're terming closely held employees? I'm wondering if that would mean sort of related.
Yeah. Yeah, so closely held employees, there's new requirements for STP, but it doesn't have any effect on whether modern awards or different legislation applies. Modern awards apply to the majority of workers in Australia, but there are some state government awards that apply to employees rather than the modern award system. So,
and so your product would deal both with state and federal based awards?
We've only catered for modern awards, and of that we've got 70 of the awards in the system, the most common ones, and we are always building new awards as well. But yeah, we haven't actually had much request at all for those state government awards. They must be on different systems, so yeah, haven't encountered that.
Thank you. And we did have another one. So everyone, while I ask this, if you have any questions, just please make sure that you pop it into the chat and address it to everyone. So it's if an employee is working 42 hours, including Saturdays for 8 hours, and they are paid their Saturday rate, should any overtime payment be on top of what
The Saturday hours.
a Saturday, or you know, should the Saturday hours cover it?
So there isn't a blanket answer to that, of course, but first you'd have to find out if this employee is covered by a modern award, and if they are, which one is it? So modern awards are usually industry-based or occupation-based, so it's a process of finding out which award applies, and then going through the clauses in that award to see what would apply. So just general, usually how an award would work, say the overtime is anything after 38 hours of a week, in the week. It may mean that if Saturday is the last day of the period, perhaps the first 4 hours would be at the Saturday rate, and the remaining 4 hours, once it's past the 38 hours, would be at overtime. So it can be that all those clauses interact, and a day can result in some overtime and some Saturdays.
Yep, certainly many what ifs in that question.
Yep.
So
yeah, definitely.
Very hard to answer, but thank you very much for the question. Can all industries work additional hours and later have time off in lieu? Or is there a limit to the extra hours worked before it is not normal work hours?
So again, time off in lieu is something that's provided for in modern awards. So first would be looking at what modern award applies. Also in saying modern awards, a business may also create their own enterprise agreement. So you're checking first, is there a modern award, or has this business actually put in an enterprise agreement? So yeah, time off in lieu is not something offered by just the general Fair Work legislation. It's something that is provided for in those agreements. So it's a matter of finding the clause in the relevant piece of legislation and finding out the conditions. Often it's not something that you can just start doing. It's an opt-in agreement, so someone has to agree to waive their right to overtime in order to accrue time off in lieu. So yeah, just a matter of understanding the legislation and the guide to how to do that.
Thank you. And how do you manage getting source information or timesheets from your clients to ensure all employees are processed and paid on time?
So that would be heavily suggesting that they follow the process of the technology package you've incorporated. So a lot of technology practices offer a few different ways. I know with our program, an employee can manually type in their timesheets on a computer. They can clock in and clock out on their phone, or they can clock in via an iPad, or hours can be automatically generated from a roster with the employee's approval. So just a matter of educating them on how that works, and then having them stick to those deadlines of, say, Monday 10 a.m. all the timesheets need to be in and approved. So and then also there's other tools such as comparing your timesheets to a roster, which will highlight if the client has missed a number of timesheets.
And can we rely on tech/timesheets, or will the employer still be responsible, e.g. half hours entered and should be paid for a full week?
So can we rely on the well, with timesheets in general, the employee must be a part of it. So having a system whereby the employee is actually generating those timesheets either by typing them in or clocking in and clocking out Yeah, just putting the responsibility back on the employee, but before it comes to you as the outsourcer, the employer must have checked over those timesheets, and by comparing to roster, for example, they can maybe able to pick up where they're missing hours there. So yeah, so the best process involves making sure all that's done before it comes to you as the outsourcer, because we're not fortune tellers in payroll and we can't guess when someone worked.
And it is quite hard. It's one of the problems with a timesheet system. You say you cut off a certain date, and then you're waiting for everyone to put it in. I know I've had many a conversation with an employee in my time to make sure that their timesheets are in
yes, definitely
on time. So
always
it is
a pain point.
It is very hard for everyone. Yes. So
yeah.
With some of the clients that you've worked on, how common is non-compliance with legislation?
I'd say so obviously implemented a lot of clients with KeyPay and worked in businesses myself. I'd say majority of clients have some element of non-compliance. It may be quite small, but it's such a complex system that you're hard pressed to find someone who's doing absolutely everything right. But in terms of the scary non-compliance one, I'd say about 10 to 20% of clients that I've seen would be non-compliant, just with that the award doesn't apply to us, or we've been doing it this way for 20 years and like we haven't updated our processes sort of attitude. So yeah, unfortunately it's quite common.
Yeah. And if an employee's annual leave was not paid out of his or her last day of employment, say for example on the 1st of June 22 and then was paid out in July 2022, do we follow the award rate for the financial year 2021, or do they go to the new award rate in financial year 22-23?
A very, very tricky question. I've never come across that before. If it was wages, I would obviously just say you worked on 30th of June and we didn't pay that until August, the old rate would still apply. So following that sort of logic, I'd probably say the old award rate applies, but in that circumstance, I would talk to Fair Work and get an actual ruling on that rather than taking a gamble on that one. Yeah.
Yep, and fair enough. Good question though. Thank you very much. So say we've got a member that's working with a client that is non-compliant in what they should be doing. What steps should they take to make sure they protect themselves really?
Okay. Well, I guess it's part of first step would be communicating what you found with the client and educating them. So referring them to the actual clauses in, say, the award that they're not complying to, offering them, I guess, talking them through what it would take to actually become compliant. If there's an actual requirement to consult with employees, so perhaps they're paying too high an allowance but too low somewhere else, in order to actually introduce a change that would take away those sort of rights, say if from the higher allowance, you'd probably want to engage an HR professional or IR professional in order to do that change right. So offering, obviously, if you have that service in your own firm, offering that service or referring them to someone who could help. So just letting them know. If after all that they're still just got their head in the sand, they think they're right, they are not going to change, then unfortunately that's where we'd recommend to just end the relationship. So as we saw with that example with the accounting firm, if you know that things aren't being done right, even though it's not your business and you're just the middleman, you're still a part of that underpayment. So yeah, I'd suggest ending that relationship.
Yeah, very, very eye-opening case, that one indeed. So, and I think finally, last question before we wrap up, are there any industries you'd suggest starting with a payroll package?
Okay. Well, it's yeah, there's not one particular industry, but I guess it would start with what you're most familiar with. So say you've already got a few clients on the books who, I keep mentioning hospitality, but say you're already involved in a little bit, I'd use that bit of a start to progress more into it. So yeah, and just I guess it would involve how many, what the potential is for numbers in those industries. So yeah, the ones that we find most common in our package are that hospitality, other health services where someone's, say, doing home care work for clients. We see a lot of, construction work and that sort of thing. So I guess it's just, picking something that you have an interest in and understanding, and then going from there, looking at the software that may complement the particular needs of those industries.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, I think we've had no further questions come in. Thank you, James, for putting forward a clarity point there to Clara's question as well. So thank you very much. Leanne, thank you very much for today. Very, very informative session. I'm sure everyone involved was very pleased with what you've put forward. So thank you very much. And so on that note, I will hand back to Linda to wrap up. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending too.
Excellent. Well, a big thank you there to both Leanne and Kristen for a fantastic webinar. Special thanks to everyone as well for your participation as well as for your attendance today. Now, that does formally conclude today's webinar, everyone. If you are ready to exit, you can go ahead by clicking on the cross on the bottom panel, just letting you know upon exiting, you will be automatically redirected to a feedback form. Now, that feedback form only takes about 30 seconds to complete. However, it's really beneficial for CPA Australia as well as our panel. So please leave us your thoughts. And Leanne, before you leave there, if you just refer to the chat box, lots of thank yous there coming in for you. So thank you once again.
Well, thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. What I might do now is I'll pop on the music as you all exit. Thank you for attending. Enjoy your day and stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much.